Welcome to another episode of Coffee with Clover. It's always a pleasure having you. According to everyday news stories, the Earth's climate is changing rapidly. The planet is being destroyed, and the culprit is said to be us humans. But are we really contributing to the deterioration of our environment? Today, my guest is a 30-year veteran in science. Please help me welcome Rod Witzel. Rod, thanks for coming on and to share with us.
Pleasure.
So, it's been talking every day in the news. Climate change is happening. Our governments are budgeting millions and billions of dollars. What's really happening with climate change?
Well, the climate is definitely getting warmer. Now, there's some disagreement on how much warmer the climate will be getting. Will it be getting 2 degrees warmer? If so, we can cope with it. If it's getting 8 or 10 degrees warmer this century, that's going to be a big problem. Some say it'll be the end of civilization. Other people say we can cope with it. We will manage. The biggest problem here is the speed or rate of change. If the climate was changing over thousands of years or 1,000 years, we'd all adapt. But if it's changing within 2 or 3 generations, it's going to be difficult to adapt. 7 billion people on planet Earth, and it's going to create great disruption.
What's causing the change that we're having? Is it us that's doing that?
Well, the Industrial Revolution started about 150, 200 years ago. And they burned fossil fuels as their main source of energy. Fossil fuels are basically coal and oil. And coal and oil have a byproduct, a pollution byproduct called CO2, carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide goes into the air and it's called a greenhouse gas. A greenhouse gas traps heat down on the planet, and that's what's warming up the planet. Now, the Earth goes through natural cycles too. But at this time, it looks like for the first time, maybe in the history of the planet, that it's the humans that are the main driver of climate change. So this is a concern for us, and the speed at which it's happening. The Industrial Revolution, it was a winner. It brought great prosperity to the working masses, and people became wealthy. But for every upside, there's a downside, and often the seeds the solutions that we think are great contain the seeds of new problems. And the problem is, and they didn't even see this 100 years ago, is climate change, which could greatly disrupt civilization, industry, in the entire world.
What is it that we're doing that's causing it so rapid?
Okay, so we're burning, the industry is burning oil and coal. China gets its energy, 70% of its energy from coal. In North America, we burn a lot of oil, natural gas, which doesn't pollute as much, but it does pollute. And this is causing CO2 to go into the atmosphere. And this is a huge problem. We have to sort of stop the CO2 going into the atmosphere because it's rising from 280 million parts per million to 360 parts per million, maybe up to 450 parts per million. So the more CO2, the warmer the Earth is going to get. And as it gets warmer, the glaciers are going to melt. The mountain glaciers will be melting. The continental glaciers will be melting. If Greenland and Antarctica, which are continental glaciers, miles, 2, 3 kilometers thick, if all that melted, it would raise the ocean levels maybe 300 feet. Well, you can imagine what that's going to do to coastal cities. You can imagine that a lot of low-lying Pacific islands would be wiped out. And there'd be famines in certain areas. That creates political turmoil, creates wars, creates migration. Hundreds of millions, maybe billions of people would be migrating. So you can see the turmoil that could possibly start. And I would say probably it's going to get somewhat very bad after the turn of the century, middle of this century.
How is it that, like the islands you said will be wiped out? What will happen?
Well, as the ocean levels rise, because the snow in the Greenland and Antarctica is melting, Greenland on June the 13th lost 70 trillion pounds of ice just in one day.
June the 13th of this year?
Yes. And that's because of a change in the weather system where the cloud level was lower, and that trapped heat down in the ground, so the surface ice began to melt. When the clouds dissipated, surface ice is brighter than water. The water sucked up more energy and then it created more melting. So, yeah, it's a big problem. It's not the only greenhouse gas.
So people will actually have to migrate to other countries?
Well, there will be a big force there, driver force, for people to go to countries where they think they can survive a lot better. Canada will probably be, relatively speaking, one of the winners.
Why is that?
There are winners and losers all the time. Losers, low-lying cities. There are at least a dozen cities with millions of people around the world that will be inundated with water. Storms come up and they just sweep over the cities and wipe them out. Low-lying Pacific islands and other places in the world will be wiped out. Probably droughts in Africa, and so you'll have a huge, maybe Asia too, you'll have a huge influx of migrants to other countries. Canada would be one of them they'd want to go to because we'd be less affected, probably less affected. We're not sure of all the feedback systems yet.
Is it because of the climate in Canada? Is it because of the snow, the different seasons that so evident?
If Canada warms up a bit, it's not such a bad thing because we are a cold country, right? If we got as warm as the United States, then we could, I mean, there would be problems in the meantime. The permafrost is melting, and that could take hundreds of years, dozens, maybe hundreds of years to melt. That's a problem, but once it's melted, you could start maybe farming those areas, possibly.
So you can see the countries that will be hit hardest are like Africa, like the Caribbean.
Tropical countries, yes.
Wow. How could,
runs near the equator, yeah.
and there's nothing. So is there a government trying to help each cities then to combat what's happening?
Well, in Peru, they have mountain glaciers, and the mountain glaciers feed and provide drinking water for a lot of people in Peru. So what they've done in Peru, and they're experimenting with this, is they're taking helicopters with whitewash and spraying the sides of the mountains white because white reflects more sunlight back into space. Dark mountainsides absorb more sunlight and energy, making them hotter. So if they spray them with whitewash, they can whitewash the mountains. They have more energy from the sun will be reflected back into space, so the mountains will not heat up as quickly. So therefore, they would hopefully save mountain glaciers. That's some of the things they're doing.
So the trees does play a part in this too, right?
The trees definitely play a part in it. The trees absorb. We need to plant lots of trees because trees take carbon dioxide out of the air and they turn it into plant fiber, and they turn it into wood. So yeah, so they sequester the plant fiber, and it takes hundreds of years for the carbon dioxide to get back.
So because we're the culprits, what should we start doing?
Well, one of the things you can do, now there's a number of greenhouse gases. One is CO2, and it's a really biggie, and the other really biggie is methane gas. Now, methane gas comes from the guts of livestock animals mainly. It comes from cattle, sheep, and pigs. Now, people eat a lot of meat. Farmers raise the meat for a profit. They sell it. These livestock produce a lot of methane gas. Methane gas is 28 times more powerful than CO2 in trapping greenhouse gases down. So if people became more vegetarian, if everybody became vegetarian, you could probably solve the problem. But it's probably not going to happen because meat consumption is rising. But for myself, I try to be vegetarian maybe 3 or 4 days a week. So I'm trying to move in the right direction. And so if we eat less meat, farmers would raise less cattle or sheep or pigs, which create the methane gas, which is a powerful, powerful greenhouse gas. And so there'd be less greenhouse gases. And some scientists say if we could wipe out all the livestock, there was no farmers, the losers would be the farmers that are making the money on this, but the winner would be the environment. You could probably lessen the impact of the warming of the earth by 50%, maybe even as much as 70%. That's almost a solution right there, just by people going vegetarian. Is it going to happen? Probably not, but people are not going to go vegetarian.
We'll take a break. More coming up. We're on. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're speaking with Rod Wetzel, a retired science professor and now speaker. Rod, after all that has been said, I think I will be leaning towards becoming a vegetarian to help save the planet. But what about the economy? What would happen?
Well, the economy is based on, we have a capitalist economy and people want to make profits. So we have to develop technologies that will make profit. People can make profit from oil products and selling oil. The oil companies do it, the coal companies do it. But those are old greenhouse gases that from fossil fuels that create the warming of the planet. One of my very favorites is hydrogen. Remember in school when you ran hydrogen electrical current through a glass of water
Yes.
and the bubbles would come up. Those were
remember.
hydrogen bubbles. Now, if you can take those bubbles, you capture them, which they can do, and you put them into good containers, and then you use them to power cars, machines, and anything you need to power. And the result is, you don't get CO2 as a result. All you do is, remember, hydrogen comes from H2O. H2O is water, so you take the hydrogen from the water, you burn it, and when the hydrogen is burned, it recombines with the oxygen. So what do you get? Your only pollution factor is clean water. So what comes out? Clean water, H2O. So it has no negative pollution effects at all. So I think a lot of more research needs to go into hydrogen. Right now, hydrogen is probably 4, maybe 5 times more expensive than burning fossil fuels. If we could develop research and techniques and technology that would make it more useful economically, then it would be a good alternative. And it'd be a beautiful alternative. We're not going to be running out of seawater or water in the planet Earth anytime for millions of years. So we got lots of source for collecting hydrogen. And it recombines with the air and makes water again.
Would you say enough research has been done, or we need to start
Research has
now?
been done on it, but somehow hydrogen a few decades ago was a popular item, then nobody started to talk about it. They started talking about solar power. And solar power is great, especially some countries. Morocco has vast fields of solar panels. And it's great because Morocco is a sunny country, so it's going to work there great. In Canada, it won't work so well. So we have to go to some other system. There are also, I mean, we've got other kinds of things they're developing. And Canadian companies are quite innovative. Out of the top 100 companies in the world, Canadian companies for innovation with the environment, Canadians are in the top 13 companies out of 100. We're only like half of 1% of the world's population. We're in the top 13. Of the companies. So we're innovative, but we need to scale up those companies to make them. They got companies now that can take carbon out of the air and put it into cement. It puts into cement, makes the cement better, and it's locked in the cement. They've also got ways of doing it, which I've heard of recently, of taking carbon and changing it into airline fluid. So there's lots of innovation out there that could help capture the carbon and use it in useful ways. You know, some of the big picture things, you know, they talked about putting dusts of cloud up in space and so forth, would reflect a little bit of sunlight back. With spacecraft, you could actually go up there and put dusts of clouds thousands of miles up and reflect some of the sunlight back into space and cool the Earth a bit.
So when world leaders are meeting and they're planning on spending billions to correct what is going wrong, it's a good thing, would you say?
Well, yes, it's a good thing that people are talking about it. It's a good thing. There's a lot of talk and probably not that much action so far because nobody likes to pay taxes. Nobody likes to see their standard of living going down. Nobody likes to see a disruption in what they're doing. And if you're a winner in oil and gas, you don't really want to see some of these other technologies because, you know, follow the money. The money's coming your way. So why would you want the money to go another way? So there's all these factors in there, yes. I think people need to, you know, you need to live locally, eat locally. I know people that travel all around the world in airplanes. A massive pollution from aircraft. If you just stop traveling the world so much, and travel is a form of entertainment. Entertain yourself at home, eat locally, drive less, go to electric cars, get rid of gas lawnmowers, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of gas lawnmowers polluting. People can maybe grow lawns that don't require any grass cutting, or maybe use electric or push mowers. Better yet, just grow lawns that don't require any grass cutting.
How do you look at it from the nuclear perspective?
Well, nuclear energy is going to be considered the sort of the big savior of the environment here. There are hundreds of nuclear plants being built around the world, or on the papers to be built around the world, hundreds and hundreds of nuclear plants. And once a nuclear plant is built, it's almost entirely CO2 free. So because the nuclear energy doesn't depend on any fossil fuels, it depends on radioactive materials. And that's great. But the big loser on this is you've got radioactive material from the nuclear plant, and that radioactive material stays radioactive for up to 500,000 years. You've got to store it in an underground area where it cannot leak into any water systems for 500,000 years, 500,000 years. That's a long time. Can you actually do that and guarantee that? I think not. I think you'll have a big problem. So for every solution, every solution contains the seeds of new problems. Nuclear power There's no CO2. It would solve that CO2 fossil fuel problem, but you're going to have the seeds of a new problem of radioactive water down the way if the radioactive material seeps into the water. So that's the big problem. Hydrogen you would not have that with. Solar power should be better, especially in countries that have lots of sunlight. Right. Those are two big ones.
So for different regions of the world, it will be affected differently.
Yes, if you're a low-lying city, it can be inundated. If you're in a drought area, if you're in a low-lying Pacific island, and that would affect us because the population is going to come in here. Southern Ontario, we're probably pretty safe. In Canada, in fact, here's what's going to happen. If the Arctic thaws and you can have year-round shipping through the Arctic, that's a winner. The shipping companies win. Instead of sending their ships all down through the Panama Canal and over to Asia, as they're sending goods from Europe to Asia or Asia to Europe through the Panama Canal, they can save thousands of kilometers by just having a shipping route through the Arctic regions. So there's winners and losers.
Thank you so much, Rod. That's so much to take in. I hope even our world leaders can tap into this and get some knowledge from that. Don't go away, more coming up. Welcome back. We're talking about climate change and how we can make a difference. My next guest says she has the answer to help climate change in joining hands and hearts in our community to help sustain our environment. Please help me welcome Alice Castleman. Alice, thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me on.
Okay, so in saving the environment and with climate change, you play a big role in your community. What's your joint effort with the other citizens?
The idea is definitely community. If it's not community, it's not going to happen. Anything to do with climate change has to start in a community. Mm-hmm. So as an old science teacher, or a former science teacher, I really feel that people need to understand how they can actually help with their hands on. And that comes through planting trees and understanding the effects of that. Planting trees in their own locality, backyard, boulevard, churchyard, cemetery, forest, buffer, whatever, wherever. But at the same time, measuring those trees as they grow to see which species are going to be successful as the climate continues to change. It's changing more rapidly. We don't know what species are going to be successful. So we need to plant them out, measure them over time, and then we can help the seeds that are chosen to be planted for in the nurseries. So that over time, because it takes 2 or 3 years to actually have a little seedling ready to plant out. Okay. So we need to know what we should be seeding in the nurseries. So that's what we're doing to help people understand that they can have an effect, but it'll be long term, and they'll have to measure those trees over time to find the success rate of each species. So we're doing that with schools. We put about 60 schools in a Planting for Change program around the Golden Horseshoe. And those trees are selected by our Science Advisory Committee, and they are representing the north, the white spruce, the south, the hop tree, and the middle temperate zone would be the bur oak, basswood, and sugar maple, of course. Now that's just the same suite of trees from the same nursery in Milton, Bob Baker Forestry Services actually, and he's supplying all those trees for all those schools, and they're able to measure those trees every year to see which ones are being successful.
Why is it so important to put the same species of trees in the same location?
Very good question. Mm-hmm. As a science teacher and a person who's trying to develop citizen scientists, I want them to understand that that's one thing they don't have to worry about measuring. It'll all be the same species, planted on one day by a school, and measured the same way. Same protocol for measurement, reporting the same way, so everybody can compare notes. And because species in Niagara may not grow the same way in, let's say, Kleinberg. So it's important that they have some variables, and as we say in science, variables that are stable or not part of the variation. And so they can actually look at climate change impacts, local soil impacts, differences from maybe distance from the lake or elevation, but not the tree species and not the fact they're planted in one day.
What role do you play in all of this? Do you determine where the trees are planted?
We work with the schools to decide, because they know where the kids play or where they have space that they might put in this suite of trees. It becomes a little forest.
That you're referring to the green space?
Yes, they're schoolyards. But if they don't have a schoolyard, they can use a nearby green space or just measure the trees on a boulevard that the city planted, for example. They don't have to plant, but we like them to plant. Yesterday we were planting in a mosque in Scarborough. We planted in a separate school. We planted in individuals. We planted in public school boards, separate school boards, independent schools. Those 60 are really a broad spectrum of schools.
What height are those trees that you just put in the earth? The trees that you just planted? Oh, high. What's the height?
Oh, size? Oh, how high? Tall? They're about, small child, let's say. You know, they're not big.
Okay.
They may be the size of your thumb.
So it takes 2 to 3 years more for them to get to average height.
Yes, they start out as that height, and that's maybe they're 4 or 5 years old. Then they grow, and over 10 years, they may become this big. They're out in Oakville. We have a school, Oakville Trafalgar Secondary School, high school. Their trees are like a little forest now, quite big. They were planted in 2008. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so we help the kids measure every year and get the idea of what's happening. But we also planting with conservation authorities and along riverbanks. Mm-hmm. We're also planting with other people who'd like to have trees, distributing trees to residential places through other agencies. The Arab Community Center, for example, of Toronto is planting trees in their area, with their Etobicoke and Scarborough, and we're subcontracting to them. Also, Parkdale is distributing trees to their residents who sign up. Mm-hmm. And what is the Working Women's Group on the Golden Mile? They're also distributing trees. So other agencies contract us, and they're getting money from the Toronto Parks and Trees Foundation, for example. Mm-hmm. Toronto District School Board is doing some preliminary work with us. A separate school board also of Toronto. So there's lots of various ways that people want to get trees in the ground, don't have the expertise for planting or measuring or maintaining the little tips and skills that we provide. We're niche.
That sounds like fun. I would really love to get involved in that.
Okay.
But how about different regions of the world? Is there any other country that's joining forces with you?
Well, let me just say that the international protocols we use in forest biodiversity plots here in southern Ontario, we've established many, and they're based on an international protocol developed by Smithsonian Institution after Rio de Janeiro. That's about 20 years ago now, I guess. The Brundtland Commission was first. So what we do there is we have like a cookie cutter of 1 hectare plots around southern Ontario, and there's a bunch across Canada. First of all, they were going to put 1 in for Canada, and then they said, no. A guy named Don McIver said, no. We're going to be able to put this in across Canada because we have lots of different ecozones, ecoregions. So we just can't do 1. So we found out about it here, trained our people, and we put it in various places with various partners. So we have some, we're just putting in a new one up near North Bay at Sunridge with a camp. Glen Bernard, and they're putting in a 1 hectare plot. We help them survey it in and do all that sort of thing, and we're putting a tree caching trail in there too, where kids can walk the trail with their device and learn about different trees. So we're working everything that deals with measurement, but different ways in different places, different partners. Mm-hmm. It's all back down to community, hands-on, as you said. Then your head around climate change, then your heart into it to do something.
That's what I was going to say. You are solely in the middle of it. How does it make you feel?
At my age, it makes me feel very good that we're able to do all these. I designed all these programs we're doing, except the international protocol we adopted in 97, I believe it was. We took it here, brought it to Canada, brought it to Ontario as a charity. Association for Canadian Education Resources. We found our niche market, so to speak, working with community, trying to help people understand what's going on and what they can do about it.
Thank you very much, Alice, for sharing with us. I hope you have a plan to spring into action in helping our planet. We have come to the end of today's show. Thanks for watching. Join us again next time.